I want to reclaim these things. I want to protect the health of these things rather than it being, deficit focus, which I think a lot of the issues that we focus on at the moment, it is, we're protecting our communities. Some really key legislative changes had to come into power to get that mahi across the line, right? So that recognition of tikanga, a blending of Māori customary law and Western customary law.
Kia ora e whakoutou, haere mai ki te kōrero, te ara whānui ki te rangi. Ko Oscar toku ingoa. I'm here with Kaedan and Kaedan. Kia ora, Kaedan.
Kia ora.
Thanks so much for your time today to come on the podcast.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. Super excited. Yeah.
Awesome. Should we start with your mahi?
Or maybe the intro. You stayed the way Oscar want to go to the mahi.
straight into it.
I love his question, but
I love the energy.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself? Then we can go straight into the mahi.
Yeah,
I can
do that.
Absolutely do that. Well, kia ora koutou, here tēnei no Ngāti Tū Wharetō, Ngāti Mania Poto, Ngāi Tūhoe Huki, called Kaedan Watts, tōku ingoa. I'm from, my marae is in Taumaranui and Tūhoe, and so I have spent a lot of time in Taumaranui, but I did all my schooling in Napier. Jumped around a little bit, did my uni in Dunedin, spent a year over in London before settling here in Wellington.
What did you study at uni?
I studied, what did I study? God, human geography is what I studied.
Awesome.
I did a BA, started in a commerce degree, and don't really know why I did that, But we made the switch. We made the switch into a BA, which I'm very thankful for. Gave me a lot of time to explore the theory, I suppose, behind the things I care about now. But grew up in Napier. Was pretty disconnected from my whakapapa, pretty disconnected from Te Ao Māori, and didn't have this affinity and passion for the environment like I do now. But as I went to university and I was able to explore these concepts, the two somewhat came together, the environmental health and protection, as well as the reclamation of our whakapapa. And I sort of had this light bulb moment when I was in university around how protecting one can also protect the other, which started that love and that affinity for the mahi I do now, which I'm very grateful for. Yeah.
right.
I think that reciprocity is such a powerful place to focus energy, because the more we do that, the better it gets, and the longer we do that for, then the more positive those impacts are, and the scale increases.
Totally, and the frame at which you come at the problem with as well, coming at it from I want to reclaim these things, I want to protect the health of these things rather than it being deficit focused, which I think a lot of the issues that we focus on at the moment, it is, we're protecting our communities because we're often deficit focused, right? We're worried about those problems. But if you can come at it with the aroha for our communities and wanting to reclaim and wanting to protect for those positive reasons, it makes it a lot more sustainable as well.
And proactive too. I feel like that helps to give us purpose in that context.
So I'm interested to know more, Kaedan. So when did that passion grow more? You say, this is what I want to do. Can I see that vocation and protection is something very strong on you.
Yeah.
And what was the why, another why behind it? What was that moving you?
Yeah, I can almost pinpoint the exact day that it happened actually. So like I mentioned, I was quite disconnected from my whakapapa back when I was back when I was younger. And I was in Year 12 Classics, and, the conversation of Māori scholarships came up in Classics, and you had all these people sort of berating it and saying these outrageous things like...
About Māori scholarships?
About how unfair it is and how it's handouts for Māori. And, keeping in mind I'm at an all-boys school where they tend to rack each other up. And the teacher, he did a pretty good job of trying to fend it off and trying to explain, hey, this is a good thing. But I remember sitting in the class and being so angry and being so just mad. And I looked at my mate, who was also Māori, and he was so angry as well. And we couldn't articulate why we were angry. I didn't have the language at that time or the understanding to realize why I was mad. I was just mad at this conversation. And then fast forward. Get to university and I start learning about, climate change and environmental health. I start learning about reclamation of our whakapapa. And I have this little light bulb moment in my head where I realized the drivers of climate change and environmental degradation are the same drivers that have caused Māori inequity as well. And so that's your colonizations, your overconsumptions, your capitalisms,
Industrialisms.
yeah, exactly. All of those drivers have led to both these issues we deal with now, with Māori inequity and climate change. Therefore, I can't look to those same drivers to have the solution. I need to look to reclamation, positive things, right? Reclamation, protecting our environment, protecting our people, uplifting Māori to get out of to get out of these issues. We can't look to those same processes to have the solutions to our problems.
I think that's so interesting because like a lot of those tools, like capitalist and commercialist tools, perpetuate all these problems. They're built on inequality and depend on environmental exploitation. Like I fully agree with you that we need to imagine other ways of problem solving those issues because we can't source those problems from the problems that perpetuate it.
Exactly. If they're the driver, they're not also going to have the solutions to the issues they create, right? But you don't have to look very far in our context in Aotearoa, but also globally, to how you get over those issues, right?
We have so many answers that we already know about.
Yeah, totally.
Like that are tried and true, like so many right at our fingertips.
Yeah, and if you took those two issues in particular with climate change and Indigenous sovereignty, or Māori self-determination, that's your blueprint right there. And if you were to honour Te Tiriti or Waitangi, if you were to, look to these blueprints that we've had for however many hundreds of years, and how Māori can lead the change on a lot of these issues, those solutions are there, and they're actually being actioned by a lot of our communities already.
Absolutely.
So it's just about enabling those communities, right, to continue actioning that change.
Absolutely. I think Māori have been proactive and innovative and designing these solutions and offering these solutions and collaborative for this throughout history. There's so many examples that we could point to of like Māori manaakitanga and rangatiratanga that has led us to better positions. And I think if we open the floodgates to that, we'll be in such a better position, for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So while we mentioned the Te Tiriti conversation, korero, maybe I want to ask you the question about, some people will say like how it's related to the climate change. So in your view, coming from the Māori worldview, how you see that Te Tiriti and climate, how close it is and how it's related to each other?
Huge questions.
yeah. And there's a lot of different ways you can take it. Practically, so to go back to the conversation we were having just then, in my opinion, the way we come out of the climate crisis is through enabling Indigenous leadership and decolonising and reclaiming our whakapapa, right?
Right.
When I say the blueprint is in front of us, that's what I'm referring to. I'm referring to Te Tiriti or Waitangi, right? Because within that document, within the acknowledgement of Māori self-determination, the right to govern our own lands, the ability to, protect our own lands and our taonga whenua, it's packaged within that there. But right now, that isn't being honoured and that isn't being uplifted.
It's been inverted and twisted and fractured and
exactly.
over history. That relationship that could have been really amazing. Like on the paper, like the deal that was signed could have been really amazing for all parties.
Exactly.
If
you want to see that in action, like from a legal perspective, even. You can look at some really popular examples that have taken off worldwide that were born out of Aotearoa. So you have the legal personhood of Te Tiriti, Whanganui River, and recently Taranaki Maunga. That gives these natural features the same rights and duties and responsibilities as a legal person. So when you go to Te Tiriti technically as a natural feature has a seat at the table to argue for its own rights and protections. That's a groundbreaking piece of mahi that had to acknowledge tikanga Māori for it to get passed into law. And so you have people of Te Tiriti, of Tūhoe, directly looking after that whenua. That is their taonga, that is their ancestor, that they're protecting the rights of. And so you saw that legal instrument, get used here in Aotearoa, then applied to Whanganui River, and then starting to take off all around the world. And so there's this huge conversation that's happening all over the world, all over the world around the right to nature. And that's a piece of mahi that's taking over in Europe and all these different places that was born out of Aotearoa. It was born out of Indigenous leadership to the climate crisis.
Absolutely. I think those are great examples. Like the personhood of the natural landscapes that gives them a well-being unto themselves. You know, like they exist because they exist, and they have existed for as long as we've been here, and they deserve to be here to exist on their own terms. Absolutely. I think that is groundbreaking. I think New Zealand, that's a way that New Zealand hits above our weight in a lot of global spheres. I think, like I'm thinking of Parihaka as another great example of like peaceful protest and justice, and there's so many elements tied up in that. And that inspired Gandhi's liberation and peaceful protest. Like there's so many things. Oh, the anti-nuclear movement in New Zealand. Like there's so many points where New Zealand is a real pioneer and a front runner. And I think we've got so much to lead. Like we often get used as a international example for Indigenous leadership. I think there's a lot we have done, and I think there's a lot more we could do. The more we lean into that, the better it is for everyone, I think.
And going back to that treaty, that treaty example, none of that is possible unless you have the treaty there, which is why this is a difficult conversation to have at a global scale.
Or in Australia, for example.
Because it is so much easier for us to make a practical argument for how you implement some of these legal strategies, right? We have examples now where tikanga had to be directly adhered to in Western law to protect the rights of nature, whereas if we were to apply this same principle and say, Australia or other South America, where we have Indigenous peoples fighting for the rights of nature there, it's a far tougher battle because they don't have this document, this partnership agreement, this legal instrument there to get that over the line. That doesn't mean that can't start some momentum born out of New Zealand to actually tackle that issue in other places as well. So it's a duty and responsibility of having these examples here, is to share that with the rest of the world and understand how we can get some of these strategies across the line for our brothers and sisters and other Indigenous communities.
Absolutely.
I 100% agree with that, because I was just sharing this conversation with a previous amazing guest, Lucy, we had in the other day that we interviewed her. We're talking about the same question I addressed, but like what you just mentioned, the privilege we have with this document. I come in the background from the Middle Eastern countries, so I'm an indigenous person for those lands of Mesopotamia. But we didn't have any treaty or any kind of document to protect us. That's why you see my people is not there anymore. Everything's been taken. So now it's very, very difficult to us to prove. But what we have, what is something fascinating about my area where I come from in Iraq and the Middle East area, every stone, every area they're trying to develop, they're finding that my ancestors' stones and the history. So we couldn't speak now. We are not there anymore, but our students are speaking. The land is speaking because they see our language. They see the history of the Assyrians, all of that in people who've been there. But that's why when sometimes I was reflecting, with my community, but I say, how if we get the Māori experience here, translated in our lands, how great it will be. With all respect, there's other questions about argument why at least we will have treaty at the first stage. Yes, we know. But you've been colonized in a way that there's one thing. You signed that or you've been all gone. So there was a wisdom there when they did this. The ancestors know what they are doing, how they are protecting their, because they were thinking, okay, great. These guys have a 10x power. They have guns and things. What we have, right? So there was kind of the wisdom that this kind of treaty to claim as much they can, the rights, from the power that is already taking the land. So that's what I like that you bring. It's that's kind of framework, examples of we have this to use it for other indigenous communities. That will be missing in Middle East. That's why we unfortunately
And part of that, right, is, yeah, in the context of Aotearoa, there is a legal instrument there to make this argument, but ultimately, some really key legislative changes had to come into power to get that mahi across the line, right? So that recognition of tikanga, a blending of Māori customary law and Western customary law had to come together in order to get those different pieces across the line. And yes, that argument is made easier with Te Tiriti, because if that isn't adhered to, that's just another breach of treaty partnership, right? So you can make that argument. However, you still can take that example and apply it to other Indigenous communities around the world. We're not going to have... The way that our communities work, right, is that the way we pass down information, the way that we look after our environments, the way we look after each other, is structurally very different from colonial or Western law, right? And so we can't rely on the same governments, structures, systems, and processes that isolated us from our lands and communities and our health as a result to find a way to pivot all that and give that back to us. I don't believe that exists within those same systems. They've got to evolve, right? And they can evolve. They can absorb these learnings from Indigenous communities, but they just have to look very different from how they're structured now, and it's going to take time. But these learnings that we have born out of Aotearoa can hopefully start to push some momentum to enable that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I think New Zealand has so much to offer that space, I think, both in the Indigenous leadership and like being an example for other international Indigenous communities. I think, like, hearing from what you were saying, I remember ages ago at the World Refugee Day a couple of years ago, you were saying, like, as a migrant to Aotearoa and Indigenous in your country, you might relate to, like, philosophically or on an ideas or values basis to Māori processes, but the process of migrating to New Zealand is a heavily crown-based process, and it's like the positionality after that, like once you're settled as a new Kiwi or a new New Zealander, then it's like, how do you hold all of those identities at the same time? I think the third layer to that is, I think Indigenous leadership is how we platform a multicultural conversation. It's through those roots and communication frameworks and through those connections that we can build a multicultural society.
And you see a lot of groups doing really incredible stuff to make that happen. But that is a fascinating point. Yeah, that migration process is crown dominated, right?
And where's the Te Tiriti education through the migration process?
Exactly. And so to get that firsthand experience of what it's like to, live on the lands of Māori, it's kind of hard to get through a crown institution, right? It's probably something not readily accessible, I imagine, but it's more a question.
So when the experience, what I tested myself, because again there's many things I relate to Māori culture from the backgrounds of Indigenous person as well, who fighting for my rights, for my people and the place where I come from. That's one identity that I can see. There's this clause we are both share that kind of Indigenous identity. The second thing I found, the Māori culture, it's more like about whānau. It's more like collective culture. And I said, this is what we also do. This we also is important for us, the big families and that kind of tradition and stuff. Then the process where I come from, it's controlled by different culture. So the other thing, how I want to say it in the point, they will say, okay, I'm grateful for the process that I've been now choosing to come to this land because I've been persecuted from that space. I'm thankful for that. But the same thing, when you try to resettle in a country that you want to call it home, you see there's a beauty of the two cultures there, and you relate a lot because you belong because of this, which is, they don't see like that's a powerful point for many migrants. Actually, because of this. Because if this group was not here, I would find it much challenging.
Yes, I can imagine.
But
I've,
then,
sorry.
you know, the process of like, then I will ask you, okay, I'm now, where we sit now under the treaty, Te Tiriti, as a migrants, because I know like Te Tiriti is a partnership between the Māori people and then the crown. Then we come behind the crown, but that's a system base.
Yeah.
But I relate to this culture.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
got
yeah.
that. And here is like I understand you will tell me you belong to crown, but I belong it as a system which I don't like. But I'm also thankful, maybe in a way, that I've put my feet on this ground. You know how? I want to try to explain my point. Like, I want to live in that world. Yes, I'm agree. But the same thing, the system maybe did not belong to me, but they brought me here.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I belong to the people who belong to this.
Yeah,
land.
and you want to be in relationship
That's the one.
with those people. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I've been lucky to be involved in quite a few international-based kaupapa with Indigenous peoples now, mainly through climate change-related work. And so that umbrella of climate change brought us together. But engaging with all these different Indigenous peoples, one of the things that blows me away consistently is how synonymous we are, how much we relate to each other on those real principle level things, like living in community, like how your relationship with the land is, you know, or the health of your relationship with the land, how we protect the land, our systems, how we govern.
The interconnectivity of all of the dimensions.
Exactly. It always fascinates me. Yeah.
So maybe then jump to Kaedan, what's coming next? We're behind the scenes. We were talking about some trips. Do you want to share that?
Oh yeah. Wow. What is coming next? Yeah, I'm quite lucky to have a few different hats in a few different spaces, and so in my day job, I'm at the Ministry of Health as the climate change lead within there, and get to work on some really privileged kaupapa within there, and you know, sort of alongside a really fabulous group of people also interested in this space, try and craft a response for the health system to respond to climate change.
It's
and so
a huge mahi. How many people are in your team?
it's one.
Yeah, I was
You're
like,
looking
that
at
is a massive job.
and then people populated around the ministry who deeply care about it too, which is awesome. Some really great champions, but
Wow.
an under-resourced space that will hopefully continue to grow as we go forward. But that always has its interesting bits.
There
But
seems
also,
to be a pretty critical intersection.
oh yeah, man, yeah. When I try to explain to people who are maybe not as deep as I am in the climate change conversation, I usually relate it to health to try and communicate what those impacts look like. Because you have your direct impacts, like what it does to my physical health, and direct impacts, how it might, you know, what respiratory diseases might happen because of the climate, your mental health impacts, displacement, conflict.
Grief.
Yeah, grief, migration, like all these different things that come from it. So I suppose those conversations come quite naturally in indigeneity, right? We understand those things quite strongly, but communicating that in a Western conversation, I find that sticks with people, because they start to see those interconnections that are probably more natural to us in the room, right? But aren't necessarily thought of as interconnectedly as, you know.
Absolutely. I think Western science has some, or Western perspectives has some great perspectives for sure. They like to isolate things in their lanes, you know?
Yeah.
And some things are spread across lots of different lanes. And I think like health and climate change is so fascinating. Like, you mentioned physical and mental health, and then also like infrastructural health. Like, we could do all of these things if we had the building for that. You know what I mean?
Well, totally. And, you know, in a direct health services response, maybe ambulance services aren't able to reach certain communities if the roads are down because a cyclone came through and ripped it up.
Or they're
like
full.
We saw. Yeah. Or the health system's already strained. If you continue adding impacts because of climate change, it's only going to further, you know, degrade that system.
Yeah. There was a report that came out of after Cyclone Gabriel that was saying that New Zealand's emergency management response can't really handle more than one event at a time.
Oh, yeah.
So I think room for improvement in our system resilience.
So we need our system thinking about it more, because you're right. And if you look at Cyclone Gabriel, that was only a moderate scale weather event.
It's like a sneeze from the Earth's perspective.
Exactly. But to answer your original question,
That's why we want to see where you're going next.
I mentioned that to also mention I support a few different community groups as well, doing some really awesome mahi, and then am involved with a few research institutions and universities as well. And so it means mahi's always pumping and going, which is the way I like to structure things. I'm always on the go, which is my preference. So a few different trips with Indigenous peoples and different Pacifica communities as well, trying to amplify the voice of the Pacific, particularly on the global stage, trying to unlock some of those resources that are out there in the international sphere. Because while we want to build connections here, there isn't a ton of money here to actually fund a lot of these solutions we want to do, not just in Aotearoa, but the wider Pacific, right?
Right.
And so trying to bridge the gap that I'm lucky enough to sit in between the international conversations and what's happening in Aotearoa and the wider Pacific. So that's always got its different moving parts.
It sounds like you've got a really interesting position to wear a lot of different hats and be involved in lots of different mahi. I guess I had a question. Do you have any advice for people like juggling multiple workloads or like hustling multiple projects? Like how to manage that space?
God.
Cafe.
I do, but I definitely don't live by it that well. But
hey, the best thing you can do with good advice is pass it on.
Exactly. Well, being part of these community groups, like Generation Zero and some of our awesome rangatahi climate change organisations, is that the part that draws me to them is that there's so many lessons that some of us who are a little bit older now in the climate advocacy space, there's so many lessons that we learned that we can sort of help our young people guide through, right? And we had a conversation about this earlier, but burnout is my biggest one. It's absolutely the thing that I support these organisations for, is to make sure that yes, there's a whole bunch of different areas we could focus on as passionate, values-driven people. But we also need to be realistic that we need to look after ourselves and that rest is important. But also viewing rest as radical as well, right? Detaching from the system and not feeding into it and allowing it to take our energy away is radical too. That's a rejection of the system.
It's more like reclaiming human rhythms rather than like a 40-hour work week, hustle it schedule.
Totally,
sinking more within our capacity and our rhythms and our agency.
And remembering to join these kind of organisations, different kaupapa and initiatives, because you care about people and the planet, not just because you want to do all these different exciting kaupapa. Yes, that's a big driver for us, but predominantly focusing on those relationships. Because if you're not having a good time with the people around you, it is very hard to keep it sustainable. So making sure you look after yourself, check in with the people around you, and try not to overcommit. I
think those are great answers to mitigate against burnout. I think finding the people to collaborate with is a really important part of that, because then you don't have to hold all of it yourself.
And these are people who probably share your ideals and will probably end up being your best mates for life, right? And so remembering that part is also a really exciting reason to do this mahi, right?
It's amazing. So, look, the time is running flight.
There's so many things we could chat about. Absolutely.
How about we can skip a little bit farther? We can take the podcast a little bit more.
Maybe
absolutely. Space for 2 more questions if you want to have one and get one more. But definitely, we would love to have more conversation with you, Kaedan. So let's get into these 2 questions, and then we talk about the next part of this podcast.
Cool.
Because there's a lot we talk about. Because I heard in the beginning and behind the scenes we were talking you are very strong in humans and social justice and things, all of that. For me, it's all about the reasons. There's something that motivates you, which you talked about today about the why and the journey through one. But if time's allow, we would love to discuss more of this,
Mm-hmm.
because this is what drives something passion, and this passion turns into idea,
Yeah.
into project, into a policy. You know,
Mm.
that's how things work, right?
Mm.
And but how to make it happen, how to continue,
Mm.
that's where the story comes through, and
Mm.
that is belong to the people who start
Yeah.
these things. So, well, I'm very interested to find out more. But sorry, Oscar, you got your question.
Oh
then,
yeah. No, I think that's fascinating. That's fascinating. I think my question was kind of going off the previous topic of like finding your collaborators and finding the mahi that you're actually passionate about and that gives you energy. I was thinking what's that saying? That's like where your skills meets the world's needs, there belies your vocation. Like that's
Oh.
the work that you're supposed to be doing. You know
Yeah,
what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah.
I think that's really interesting. Would you have any advice for people to help find their work? You know what I mean, rather than their job.
Yeah, this is a conversation I've had quite a few times with young people. There was this really cool event. I don't know if it's still run, but I hope it is, by the BA Society up at Vic University here in Pōneke. And it was for the BA students to understand, what can I do with
The
this
benefits of a
degree.
BA.
Yeah. And I'm a big BA advocate because it allowed me to think the way I think now.
Absolutely.
And so the panel was there to talk about the very vast, spectrum of things that you can do with this degree. And why I bring that up is that, I think we go into these things, these values-driven kaupapa in these different areas, a lot of the time trying to think about, well, how is this going to sustain me career-wise? And fortunately, the mahi that, I focus on now does pay, but that's not what brought me in there. These things will tend to naturally slot together if you spend more time in these spaces and you craft your niche and you understand, what do I want to give to this space? Because there is a myriad of things out there that we can do, employment-wise for these different kaupapa. But I think first and foremost, just understanding what you care about is the part that's most important. And that'll, naturally guide you to the right people that can give you the right advice, to the right organizations that can help you, set
Consolidate
yourself up.
experience in that area.
Yeah, exactly. And you just never know what will happen if you just go to that one event or if you just reach out to that one person and start having these conversations with people who probably want to be in your community as well. And so building that community would be my main piece of advice is just talk to people.
I think that's great advice.
Yeah.
I think like going to the events and like showing up and meeting the people like that's the hardest part. It's getting out the door, and once you're there, I think it'll all roll out from there. I think there's an expectation for people to kind of already have all of the answers or to already know the answers. But I think those sorts of events are where you don't have to have the answers, and it's where the next answer gets kind of revealed. It's where you get the pieces for the next step. You know what I mean?
And you'll never have them all, right? But that's also the cool bit, because other people have answers, and you can go talk to them about their answers, and you can share ideas and ideate, and do the fun part, which is building those connections and coming up with kaupapa together, right? And so that would be the main thing, is just find your passion area, and then let things build out from there.
Yeah,
I think that's a great answer.
absolutely. Which just took my question, which I want to ask. What's your message? But I see there's a lot of messages coming through and advices. But let me ask my question a different way, which is about motivation. Because you mentioned go to that event, right? So now there's a lot of young people. There's a lot of opportunities going around the city, right? Many organizations do cool stuff, but sometimes you see the motivation is not enough. So what is something you want to say as advice or as a message to motivate those people to when they find any opportunity of a workshop or event to take it?
To go to that event and be a part
to
of
do it.
Yeah, I mean, very rarely in my life have I ever gone to a workshop or a panel or some kind of gathering of passionate people and regretted it. I don't know if that's ever happened. And I've gone to a lot. Now, you're always going to find someone who wants to talk, and you're going to learn something about somebody or a kaupapa. They're going to have insight into something you never knew about. And weighing that up versus not going, I think you'll find probably 9 times out of 10 you got more out of going than not going, right?
Absolutely. I would resonate that with my experience as well. Like
Yeah.
I've every opportunity I've gone to, like even if I was a bit tired, it's been worth going. Like
Totally,
I've learned something, or I've met people, or like that new experience.
You know the butterfly effect?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sometimes I just do that. And just sort of backtrack in my head, like, how did this thing happen? And you can trace back the different events that sort of came together to allow that opportunity or really awesome project that you're working on right now to happen. And it's really funny, just showing up to one random workshop can just set off this chain of awesome stuff.
I think one of the things that's really interesting about that is that if you go to those events, you're really likely to meet other like-minded people, other collaborators, other people who are thinking in the same space, and you can learn from them, you can teach each other stuff. There's momentum that can be generated in those spaces.
Totally. And in a place like Wellington, we're very lucky because there's stuff happening constantly. But even when I go around the country, there's still stuff happening in communities all over this country, right? And there may be something as straightforward as a beach cleanup where we're doing this to get this outcome and result out of it. Or maybe it's like an all-day wānanga to talk about this really theoretical thing. But there's stuff happening all over the place with people who probably care about the same stuff that you do.
Yeah, absolutely. And for our migrant listeners, like coming into Wellington and Aotearoa, I'd say the more you go to those events and the more you like put yourself out there and collaborate in that space, the more you'll meet like the same people at a lot of the same events, you know, like that community network is really quick to build in New Zealand. Really quick to build. Yeah.
Wow, it's just great. You know, still we have to finish it now.
There's so much we could keep chatting about it. Thanks so much for your time.
I love
Definitely.
that. Yeah, I love that. If you pass me the book,
Oh, sure.
which is, you know, the way you explain, Kaedan, that going to an event, at least you will be the one person, right? They say now, the modern language, your network is your net worth. You know, that's what which is true, right? If you get how many people are going to explain and what have led me to this project, because I've been connected to this one, that one. Because that is power right now. It's who you know, right? The people, the amount of access to those people and stuff. Yep. So anyone listening, watching, just do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely.
And leave your thoughts in the comments. We'd be interested to hear what you think.
This is the one. So this was amazing, Corridors. I just want to thank you for your time.
Yeah,
Thank you both.
Thank you. There is a part of tradition of season 6. Last season we started this. We ask our guests a question from the book. Then this is a question been written by a previous guest. If only you watch our YouTube, you will see who was that person.
You got to watch the previous episode, though.
Right. Okay. And then you will also have opportunity to write the question for whoever is the next.
good. Okay.
Cool. Do you want to read it?
Oh, you go. How might we become better tipuna and build a more cohesive society and sustainable future for our mokopuna?
Amazing.
Huge question.
Really small question. I think we've covered a lot of ground on that today, right? I think there's a balance that has to be struck when you engage in kaupapa like this. But particularly, a lesson that I think is really important in Te Ao Māori is that intergenerational focus on things. And we talked about, Tūruwera, Whanganui Awa, and we talked about Taranaki Maunga as these legal personhood status, which essentially means their tipuna status is recognised in Western law, right? But in Te Ao Māori, those natural features were always recognised as tipuna. They were always recognised as mai whanaunga. So when I introduce myself in a room, I'm going to start with my pepeha, right? So I'm going to tell you the awa and the maunga I come from. I'm going to tell you the iwi I come from, where I live, the communities that are around me, and then I'm going to tell you me. Because connection to place and people is critical to understanding who I am. And that's relevant as well for the people who come after. And so continuing to build those connections and share those knowledges and be cognizant of the system that we exist in that is so interconnected, I think is one of those really critical bits. And it can be done as simply as just connecting with people with good intentions and engaging and building good relationships with people, you know, to do the right thing, to protect our people, to protect our planet. If we just keep doing that with those principles at the forefront, there's no way that we can stuff that up. Yeah.
What a beautiful.
That's a great answer. That's a great answer.
Thanks.
A great way to
I
finish.
was hoping that wasn't a ramble, but that,
No, you're just amazing. So again, thank you so much, Kia ora, Kaedan, to share your corridor with us here and many people who are listening and watching this podcast.
yeah, kia ora koroa. Thank you for having me.
Kia ora.
Thank
Thanks so
you
much for your
Kia
time.
ora.
I think that's us. We'll be super interested to hear what you think about this episode in the comments, and see you in the next episode. Thanks so much.
Kia ora.